There's a lot of good horror writers, but there's not so many great horror writers. The United States has provided us with two great horror writers, Edgar Allan Poe and Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Poe wrote beautiful, usually dark poetry and short stories about madness, obsession, and death. He's amazing. Lovecraft wrote his tales about a century later. Now, there's some overlap in style. Some Lovecraft stories seem to echo Poe, like The Outsider, In the Vault, or The Picture in the House. So some of his poems are a little like Poe's. I would admit that in general, Lovecraft's poems, while I like them a lot, are not at the level of Poe's quality. But Lovecraft went in a different direction than Poe. Poe thought the great terror was inside your head, inside your mind. Lovecraft didn't think this. He said, our minds are finite, there's stuff in there, but the greatest terror is in the endless reaches of the universe, in the heartless, uncaring void. That's where Lovecraft found horror. Lovecraft was keenly interested in science and astronomy, so he faced the reality that the universe is vast and that human beings are small and limited. Therefore, there must be entities and terrors beyond what we can even imagine. And so in Lovecraft's tales, he tries to expand our imagination, not contract it and focus inwardly. He's trying to focus it outward. His creatures are beyond our comprehension. In one of the stories, the deadly enemy is a color. I mean, how can you fight a color? In his most famous tale, The Call of Cthulhu, the beings he's facing don't even follow our natural laws. I've touched upon this in another pair of videos. Okay, so Lovecraft, yeah, he has space monsters, big deal. So did H.G. Wells 30 years before. And Wells is also logical and scientific, just like Lovecraft, though Lovecraft doesn't have as much social commentary. Well, Lovecraft has psychic and magical terrors too. Well, so did Arthur Machen 30 years before. By the way, Lovecraft adored Arthur Machen, thought him one of the 4 great fantastic writers of modern times. If for that reason alone, you should check out Arthur Machen. And so no wonder so many of Machen's themes are echoed in Lovecraft. Well, Lovecraft has scientific experiments that go wrong. Well, so did Robert Louis Stevenson many years before. So if Wells and Arthur Machen and Robert Louis Stevenson and other authors do the same things Lovecraft did, what makes him so special? Well, when I first read Lovecraft or encountered Lovecraft, I was an avid reader. I'd already read H.G. Wells. I'd read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Stevenson. I hadn't read Arthur Machen yet, but I did shortly afterwards. So I'd recognized these themes. I'd seen these things before, but Lovecraft still blew me away. Why? Well, it might be hard to articulate at first because it's a combination of many factors. For one thing, Lovecraft is extreme. He went further than the other writers. And H.G. Wells describes a trip to the moon unthinkably far away. Lovecraft have aliens who come to us from Pluto, but Pluto is not even their home. That's just a forward base. They're from even further away. Machen had curses that come upon us from the Stone Age. Lovecraft has curses that emanate from before there was life on Earth. Stevenson has a man who turns into a monster. Lovecraft had a whole town of people that turn into monsters. Poe has tales where someone is obsessed with a dead or dying lover. Lovecraft has a tale in which the protagonists dig up graves to sport with and presumably have sex with the corpses. And these are not fresh corpses. And Lovecraft jam-packs his stories full of events. In the story about the necrophiles, the grave stealers, which is called The Hound, the fact that the so-called heroes are digging up the bodies is like peripheral to the main thrust of the story, which is vengeance from beyond the grave. Lovecraft has this tale about incest and the horrors of incest. But instead of being like mean dad is chasing after the daughter or whatever, okay, he doesn't focus on the mental generation. He shows us the result of generations of this, which for Lovecraft is a bunch of inhuman cannibal monsters who terrorize the countryside. Lovecraft is horror gone extreme. So that's the first thing that makes him unusual. Second, he changes the pattern of horror. Most horror stories before Lovecraft followed this pattern. You have people in the normal world. Then, like, say, the book Frankenstein. You start in the normal world. Then you have something unusual, terrible happen. A serial killer. Frankenstein's monster gets made. There's a ghost. Whatever it is, something intrudes into the world. Something from beyond, outside, unusual, unthinkable. Then, at the end of the story, the people are dead or killed or not, and it's gone away. At the end of Frankenstein, you're back in the normal world. At the end of Dracula, you're back in the normal world. At the end of most ghost stories, you're back in the normal world. Lovecraft doesn't follow this pattern. Instead, we start in the normal world like conventional horror. And then there's an intrusion, just like conventional horror. But then Lovecraft reveals to us that there is no normal world. Our belief in it was a lie. We are thus left hopeless and helpless in this new dire reality with no escape. At the end of the story, The Call of Cthulhu, the hero realizes that all human life, experience, science, art, aspirations, everything is pointless, puny, and temporary. Pretty soon, the Starspawn are going to wake up and they're going to rinse us off the planet just like a housewife rinses grease off a plate. It all is for nothing. And all of our hopes and dreams and aspirations are going to be no more. That's why he wants to keep it a secret. He doesn't want people to realize that it's all for nothing. At the end of the story, The Shadow over Innsmouth, outsider, the rats in the walls, and the evil clergyman, the protagonist cannot go back to the normal world. He is changed forever. Other authors might kill the protagonist or drive them insane. Lovecraft abandons them. And there's more. Lovecraft's hero is you. Now, one of the criticisms Lovecraft gets, and it's kind of a fair one, is that his heroes don't have much personality. Okay? It's true. They don't have really strong quirks. They don't have weird eccentricities. Even the necrophiles in The Hound, he doesn't focus on their evil activity. He presents them without much emotion as the main characters. But this is by design. See, Lovecraft wants to put you in the driver's seat. A lot of his stories are told first person. Okay? And so what he does is, by not giving the guy much of a personality, you can project your personality onto this individual easily. You're not jarred away from it by the guy doing something odd. And thus, because he has no personality, he can be you. So you're the guy in the story reading it. Now, Lovecraft removes the problem of suspension of disbelief. He's the guy that solved this issue. Now, a lot of horror stories have surprise endings. Lovecraft really doesn't. Some people misunderstand what's going on in the stories. Doesn't matter if they misunderstand it or not. What he's doing is still taking effect. You see, in most supernatural stories or alien invasions, whatever, one of the problems the author has is to get you to believe in his monster. So you're not sitting there saying, yeah, sure, this is bogus. He wants you to convince you that aliens or vampires or whatever it is are real. Now, sometimes he provides evidence. He says, oh, there was a case of a vampire in 1897. See, they're real. Ooh, but Lovecraft found a new technique. You see, in his stories, the actual hero, the protagonist who is being you, doesn't believe in the supernatural. And as the story goes on, he keeps making up ever more ridiculous theories to explain away the unusual events. Let's take one of his more minor stories, The Nameless City. The hero finds ruins in the middle of Arabia. On the walls of the ruins, there's images of intelligent reptiles. So he says, obviously there were no intelligent reptiles, so these are actually the people that carved the ruins. Their artistic thing was to put themselves as images of the reptiles. Okay? Even when the carvings show him the reptiles killing and torturing humans, he says, well, the city's built by humans, and they're showing, these are humans who aren't from the city, so they show them as humans, but the reptiles are actually humans. Then he finds actual preserved mummies of the reptile creatures, and he says, oh, these are surgically modified crocodiles preserved by taxidermy, because they look like the gods of the people. In other words, this protagonist in The Nameless City is an idiot, okay? He refuses to see the evidence of his own eyes. There's carvings of reptile monsters fighting humans being extinct. There's no evidence of humans, but he says, no, I refuse to believe this. But that's what Lovecraft wants you to think. He wants you to agree with him that this guy's a dolt. Because what happens is that you yourself, reading the story, are arguing against the hero. You're thinking, what a maroon. Can he not see the evidence of his own eyes? This city was built by hideous saurians. Come on, guy, wake up. See what's happening. You see what Lovecraft has done? He's gotten you to argue his case for him. Instead of needing to get you to suspend your disbelief, he has his hero do the arguments, and ever more stupid arguments, and more like carefully constructed arguments that don't really make sense to see what his point of view is. So instead of Lovecraft having to get you to suspend your disbelief, he has enlisted you in his side, and you're arguing for the monsters or the horrors against the willful blindness of the narrator. So suspension of disbelief isn't really an issue in Lovecraft. His own characters do it all for you. Of course, eventually they have to find out that it's real. And so he sees the ghost of the lizardman, or he finds the face and hands of Henry Akeley, or he finds a book written in English from 63 million years ago. Now he knows. So the ending isn't really a surprise ending. It's a confirmation ending that, yes, it was real. Now, you knew like halfway into the story or earlier that there was lizard people, but the narrator has to find out the hard way. Now, Lovecraft had another thing that he did that was really important. He was super active in the American press, in the Amateur Press Association, okay, which used to be how even role-playing games and stuff were promulgated in the 70s before the advent of the internet. These monthly magazines would go around that were all written by articles by amateurs, and he did this for science and stuff. And he also carried on a really active and voluminous correspondence, hundreds of thousands of pages with other horror authors. He and other fantasy authors, Clark Ashton Smith, he basically bred Robert Bloch out of the primeval slime from a 17-year-old kid into being the author of Psycho and The Screaming People, which is actually my favorite Robert Bloch story. Check it out. He talked to Robert E. Howard, the author of Conan, and he didn't build Robert E. Howard out of nothing. Robert E. Howard would have been an author anyway, but Lovecraft's influence is still seen in some of Robert E. Howard's works. So Frank Belknap Long is another one. He was seeding his influence among all these other authors and spreading it and creating them and like forging the American horror genre. He wrote a lengthy, very well done essay about why horror is not something to be sneered at, not something to be ignored, not something to be skipped, not a minor element, but a strong element. This is a supernatural horror literature, which is a great source for lots and lots of stories you should go look up. I think there's even a book out now that has the stories written in Lovecraft's book that he mentioned, so you can read them all. Lovecraft, in addition, he did something new in the realm of story writing, which is that he invented books and gods like other guys had done, alien beings, but he encouraged other people to use them. So he came up with the Necronomicon and he said, hey, Frank Belknap Long, you should use the Necronomicon. Robert Bloch, why don't you use it? And so these other guys would use it. So as a kid growing up, I would read this book by Lovecraft. Oh, Necronomicon. Oh, creepy book. Okay, then I put it down. Then I pull up a book by some completely other author in a different book, and it has the Necronomicon. And as a kid, this had quite an effect on me because it was like, is the Necronomicon real? Because multiple books all talk about it. And they gave it an aura of realness. More than if the Necronomicon had just been in Lovecraft. Also, references to Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth in these other books and these other authors. Lovecraft is spreading his mythos into other areas, giving it more of a veneer, a concept of reality. This was a unique feature, So Lovecraft wrote horror differently. He had extreme horror. His hero was you. He gets rid of suspension of disbelief. He cultivates other authors and influences them. Pretty much every modern author when he writes a story, he is either writing a story with some bits of Lovecraft in it, or he's consciously being different from Lovecraft. Either way, he's being influenced by Lovecraft, though. Okay? He wrote and he imagined things never done before, and he did so in an amazing and engaging way, and he did it in only a couple short decades of writing. I am so sad that he died young. His legacy is eternal, though he would have been amazed to see how popular he is now. Lovecraft. I'm going to finish with a funny story. I was in England a few years ago, and I came to I was in Soho, which is a seedy part of England, and there was a great big storefront, and it said, Lovecraft. So I said, wow, a whole store about Lovecraft. Let's go in there. So I go in, and it turns out to be porn, right? Lovecraft, that's what it was about. And I'm like, oh. So I'm looking around, and I mentioned some remarked to the guy in the store, said, "Oh, I thought you'd be the H.P. Lovecraft guy." And he says, "Oh, you mean this guy?" And he pulls out this big box of Lovecraft books. And I say, "What the heck? What are these doing here?" And he said, "Well, we got these by mistake. Some guy shipped in here thinking that it was appropriate to our store. I never heard of this author, but he's got the same last name as our store, so we have the books here. You want them?" And I did. So I thought it was funny. And there we are. Take care.